This session is called Tribal Knowledge in Agile Teams. My name is Jeffrey Miller, and I work for Manifest Solutions. I've been in the industry for over 20 years and full stack Microsoft developer. I also do Neo4j. I work as a continuous delivery lead in a client. And other than speaking at conferences, I've also recently become a children's author. Wrote a children's book called Skeeters. It's a battle between a group of mosquitoes and Wendell for the backyard. So it's a fun read. The proceeds, part of the proceeds go to support adoption. So I've got copies if you want to see it later. And I'm also a new dad. So speaking of adoption, thank you. We've got he'll be 16 months old on Tuesday, so that's exciting. And man, you talk about life-changing. It really is. So lots of life lessons, life learning. So since this is a presentation on tribal knowledge, this is my only slide of material. We don't want to take any notes or make any record of anything. So, just, nobody writes things down, right? So this is my only slide. But in fact, I'm actually lying, so I do have slides. But we wonder when we hear the term tribal knowledge, has anybody heard the term tribal knowledge? Okay, it's kind of insider knowledge. Wikipedia defines it as information known within a tribe or a community of people, and it's unknown outside. So that's what we're talking about. So just for a second, I want you to imagine that you're a new person on a team. You've just joined a company, or maybe you transferred in from outside. And you're on a development team and you're doing some kind of work product, and you've been working on this for a while, and you go to submit it, and you're like, all right, this is great, and you hit go, and about 10 minutes later somebody comes by and says, yeah, that thing you just checked in, that's not usually the way that we do it here. So what they're actually saying and what you're hearing is you're doing it wrong. And the reason you're doing it wrong is because they didn't tell you up front how they expected you to do it. They didn't hand you a guidebook or a document because there probably isn't one. So the only thing that you can do in that moment is you can just say, sorry, I don't know what I should have done. You might be feeling a little embarrassed, maybe some frustration, or even angry. It's like, hey, I take my job seriously, and normally I do what I can to do it well. Well, what you just experienced is what I call a tribal knowledge fail. So in that scenario, you kind of feel like this illustration. It's you against the many, or the many against the one. But I want to encourage you, I want to tell you, you should stop. Now turn to your neighbor and tell them it's not your fault. Can you say that? It's not your fault. It's really not. It's the fault of the process. It's the fault of the team. It's the manager. It's always the manager. So, and unfortunately, what you don't know can actually cause problems. It can create trouble. But if you learn the things, eventually, then you can succeed anyway. So, things that are preventable, we can solve those. And if we don't have vital information, a lot of times you can get mediocre results. And it's not really because the people aren't professional, it's because the process doesn't help you. Now the problem is that we don't write things down, or we don't record them in ways that other people can consume and learn from. Business is hard enough, but when somebody quits or gets transferred, that knowledge that's stuck in their head, it walks out the door with them, and you're forced to cope without that person. Now, leaks are expensive. When you lose that knowledge, the lack of that knowledge, it creates problems for the remaining people. That might mean that you're waiting for answers. Agile and Lean especially has different kinds of wastes. And one of those types of wastes is waiting. So waiting for answers, if you have someone that's the only person that knows something, a particular specialty, and you always have to wait for them to be available to get your job done or to get that answer, then that's a form of waste. The introduction of defects, if you don't have the knowledge, you're going to do something that you're not supposed to. Outages can happen from that. And if you don't know what the standards are or what good practice is, you can introduce things like security vulnerabilities. And then you're forced to go back and rework it. So not handling your knowledge well can lead to a lot of cost in terms of rework. Now, when do leaks happen? I mean, I changed jobs. So that's the obvious one. You're fired or I quit. Those are both cases where you're losing a person on the team, maybe for good reason. But whatever they knew, their contribution to the team, if there was any, it's gone. So you've got promotion. Someone may get promoted to a new position and you're happy for them, but all of a sudden you're forced to deal with the work that they were handling. Then you've got retirement. So retired people, they walk out with the door with their knowledge, and you've got the baby boomer generation that's a lot of them are coming up for retirement. And I was on a project not too long ago. We got a request for assistance because the script that had been written to reset the FTP passwords every 90 days had suddenly stopped working, and the department that owned the script, they didn't have anybody to work on it because the person that had worked on it and created it had retired 5 years prior, and they wanted us to work on it. So it's like, well, I don't know. It could be as simple as someone out sick for the day or the week, or having surgery. We can't get this particular work done because they're off or they're out. Family emergencies. Or maybe you go on vacation, and you can always tell if there's a tribal knowledge problem by the tone of voice when people see you when you get back. They're like, yeah, I hope you had fun. So, or, when there's a team member, maybe Alex is away to Comic-Con and you have this production outage and you find out what the solution is, and he alone knows that he's got this script on his hard drive, and he gets back, he's like, what's the big deal? And he runs the script and the outage is over and life goes on, but you forget how angry you were at that problem and how much you wanted to do something about it. So it can be a nightmare. And then, of course, there are worse circumstances. I received an email recently. It says, my apologies for the delay. Unfortunately, the original point of contact passed away unexpectedly earlier this week. Until his replacement is named, we will need to use the other point of contact. Please let me know if anything else is needed. So a real life scenario where we talk about bus numbers, what if this person gets hit by a bus? Who's going to cover what they know? But in this case, there was actually someone on the project that had that happen. Now, why is this so hard? Well, part of it is because there's so much to know. You can't know everything, and there are skill knowledge, and then there is business knowledge for what you're working on. And some knowledge is hard to transfer because you have to learn it by experience. As a new dad, I was told, you got a young boy, you need to watch out when he's changing those diapers. You can have random cannon fire, and you got to duck and cover. And I'm like, all right, yeah, whatever. And then I learned the lesson the hard way. So, now it's internalized. But sometimes there's information that you can't just write down and it sink in. So, and sometimes experts, that when you become so experienced, it becomes difficult to convey all of that inside knowledge. Now, people may ask you a question and you know the answer, but you can't distill all the body of knowledge that you have. And then Agile, the Agile Manifesto says, we value working software over comprehensive documentation. Well, it doesn't say don't do documentation. They say, well, we value the things on the right, we value the things on the left more. So a lot of people take that and they put documentation and knowledge capture on the back seat. And, there's no silver bullets, so there's no single methodology or method that's going to cover all your bases and solve the problem. So, what's in the way? Well, we have a lot of tools. We have, SharePoint. We got other things like that. We got, wikis and such. But it can often be disorganized, and depending on who set it up and how long it's been, it may be out of date. And if everybody's reinventing from scratch, it can get really messy. So why don't we do it? Well, the first thing we say is we don't have enough time. We're busy coding, we're busy developing and releasing software. And a lot of times there is time pressure, and that can't be ignored. There are real deadlines, and you have to deal with those. Other times it's like, well, we tried this before and it didn't work. Nobody cared. There's some apathy in the situation. And another reason we don't do it is when we're in the moment, we're like, oh, I've got this perfect aha understanding of what I'm looking at right now. And if I could just take a snapshot of what's in my head right now, it would be the perfect way to tell somebody about it. But then, you go to lunch, you go home for the day, go home for the weekend, you can show up on Monday, you're like, I know that I work here. What was I working on? I don't remember. So that understanding is so fragile, And, when there's an outage or something that you really want to go, hey, we shouldn't have this problem, we shouldn't keep doing this, that urgency fades as time passes. So those are against us. And sometimes the other members of the team or management kind of put back pressure on any kind of initiative. Have interruptions, somebody shows up your desk, you're like, oh, I got it, I'm going to hit enter, and then they're like, hey, can I talk to you for a second? And you're like, it's gone. So again, there are no silver bullets. And if you have a small team, maybe you're wearing a lot of hats. Maybe you're wearing so many hats and you're juggling these roles, so it makes it difficult to switch gears and keep what you need to document it to let somebody else work on it. So what's the solution? Well, the first solution is to come up with a will to not do this again. You got to say, this is enough. We've got to fix this. So imagine that we can travel back in time, and we're going to go back to that moment where you checked in your work. And I want you to imagine that you just hit enter, they come to your desk, they say, that's not how we usually do things. And what do you know? You're smiling. Instead of feeling angry or frustrated or embarrassed, you're like, yes, I recognize what's happening right now, because this is a moment where you can do something about it. So everybody has this realization that something's wrong, but now you have a way to move forward. And what I like to tell people is to come up with a multifaceted approach. The strategy, I call it, create a knowledge playbook. A knowledge playbook basically is a set of strategies that no single one will fix every problem, but when you put them together, you come pretty darn close. So what's in it? Well, if you think about it for a minute, if you're a football coach and you're long yardage on third down, you're probably going to run a pass play because it might not work if you run the ball. Well, those things are situational. So situational guidance. You've got Gherkin testing language, given this, when this happens, then this should result. So whenever you're thinking of strategies, think about the situations where they apply. Reference material. Sometimes it's not about how the system works. You need to know where the bodies are buried and where the configuration files live. Hopefully the team is aware of that, but if you have new members, they may not know. So reference material like that. Checklists and templates. Checklists can be extremely helpful for making sure that you don't make mistakes, even on things that you think are routine. 99 times out of 100 you get all the steps, but that 100th time something goes wrong. Or if you want to hand off your job to somebody else, well, all of a sudden having that checklist, you can say, hey, new person, I do this from memory, but you can do this and check these off. Templates, we always talk about don't repeat yourself. Don't keep doing the same work, the same mundane stuff too many times. And then finally, there's questions. Questions can be a powerful tool in helping our thinking in situations. And I wrap this all up in an acronym I call KIT. And I say that means keep it together. I don't know if anybody else came up with that, but so all of this stuff, all these practices, they should be consolidated and centralized and curated. And so my first instruction to you is you should pick a knowledge base. You could create a knowledge base, either OneNote or Wiki or something similar, but pick one. When you find references online, you're like, hey, look, I Googled for 30 minutes and I found this one magic Stack Overflow page that had the right green check mark, solved my problem. You should capture that. Excuse me. Troubleshooting notes. Anytime you have a problem that takes a while to solve and maybe you have to stop partway through, keep good notes. Excuse me. Now you should pick one and stick with it. it may not happen instantly, but you can always start with some seed content. And you shouldn't wait. You should do it as soon as you can. Now, I mentioned Wiki, and Wiki is not an instant turnkey solution a lot of times. Sometimes you can find pretty good ones. I found in the Office 365, Microsoft Office environments, that OneNote does a really good job, especially for small teams. So that's what I'm using now. Excuse me. Now, why Wiki works is a number of facets. Wiki has participation by default enabled, so anybody can contribute, and information can be discoverable more easily because you can easily link from one article to another just by name. New content can be introduced easily. All you have to do is create a new link and then follow that link, and it'll let you create a page. And if you find stuff that's out of date, it's not very hard to fix it. One of the things about Wiki that's special is that you can create intent before you actually create the content. And what I like to do is create a most wanted list. When I start the Wiki as a knowledge base, I'll say I want to have, I'll put a list of links for database standards or team contact list or those kind of things. And I don't actually have to create them. I just put them in place for the next person to come along. Knowledge worth capturing. Well, what are we talking about when we talk about a knowledge base? A lot of times it's easiest to just start with what we encounter every day. Excuse me. It's really important to up your personal capture game. Excuse me. I use a bullet journal a lot, a notebook, for just quick paper notes meetings. I also use some tools like Evernote and OneNote. Pardon me. It could be something as simple as a Word doc. It doesn't have to be a complicated tome with multiple pages. I always take pictures of whiteboard photos that look pretty good. There's an app called Cam Scanner. I don't know if you've heard of it, but also Microsoft Office has Office Lens that's pretty good. And it will take the image of the whiteboard and it'll let you crop it and then de-skew it so everything looks straight. I also use mind maps. There's a free application called FreePlane that helps me organize my brainstorming. And then one vital part is screenshots. If you're not able to do a screenshot quickly and easily and mark it up, that's a real point of friction in your process, and that's going to stop you from capturing the things that you need in your knowledge base. Now, Agile teams and methods often speak of retrospectives. Retrospectives are very valuable if you use them well, and unfortunately some teams will just make them ceremony. At the end of an iteration review, they'll say, okay, what did we do right, what did we do wrong, what can we do better? And then when that happens, that's it. That's the end of the conversation. Well, if that doesn't create feedback back into your planning process, then you've not really leveraged the value that can hold. So you should make retrospectives count. NASA is one of our country's greatest scientific organizations. They've had some amazing accomplishments, but also some astounding failures. And they've actually created a lessons learned database that's even open to the public that you can go search. And it covers all of the famous ones and the not so famous ones, going clear back to all the space missions. I always like to name the lessons that I learn. I've worked on a lot of assignments as a consultant, and sometimes I'm like, man, this is a really bad project. So I try to back away from that feeling and go with something a little bit more specific. So don't let a project be vaguely bad. Man, I hated that one. Why did you hate it? Write it down. Even if it's just for yourself, use that lesson going forward and name the problems. Retrospective results should go back into your planning. So After each release or each quarter, I think you should go back and look at the retrospectives that you had and say, hey, wait a minute, have we gotten all this value that we can get out of this, and is this something that we should put on the backlog? In the DevOps Handbook, Chapter 20, it talks about turning organizations into learning organizations and making global improvements. They talk about blameless postmortems. So when they have a production outage, they, a lot of times they won't consider the outage closed until a blameless postmortem has been conducted. And usually the person that introduced the problem is nominated as the person to go around championing what the solution was and letting everybody know what to look out for. I mentioned earlier the experience of being new to a team. Well, you can do a lot to improve your onboarding. Anybody drive a U-Haul lately? Anybody ever drive a U-Haul? Okay, was it fun? No, right? Okay, this is what I call the tale of tow haul mode. All right, does anybody know what tow haul mode is? Okay, a couple people, don't spoil it for us. Now, my question is, what's this light? All right, this is on the dash when you're driving a U-Haul. And, I was helping to move my wife down from out of state, from somewhere up north. I won't mention where. And I was driving the U-Haul for the first time, and we reserved it online, and then we get a call, and it says, hey, I hate to do this to you. We don't have the 10-foot truck available. Would you like the 14-foot truck instead? I'm like, cool, upgrade, right? So, we get it loaded up, we get out on the highway, and I'm like, man, I cannot drive this thing. It's clumsy, it's slow, and it's got this gas efficiency meter on the dash that tells you how well you're doing and what your miles per gallon is. And when you coast, it's like all green, you're great, but I was getting like 8.9 miles per gallon. Driving a U-Haul, it's bigger because of the upgrade, and it's like a 40-gallon tank, and gas was $3.75 at the time. I filled it up maybe twice on a 250-mile trip. And it wasn't until I got about 7 miles from the drop-off point when I saw, what's this button? And so I pressed the button. What could it hurt, right? So all of a sudden this truck starts just performing like you wouldn't believe. And I'm like, wait a minute, you mean I've been driving this truck in some kind of mode that I didn't need to be driving in all this time, and it's costing me all kinds of money? So I'm like, well, they didn't tell me this at the store. I looked at the paperwork, there was nothing about tow haul mode. I even went on U-Haul's website later just to check my sanity. I searched for tow and haul on uhaul.com, and you can imagine what kind of good results you'll get, right? Tow and haul. So I backed off, I used Google, and I said site search, tow haul on uhaul.com, and I still didn't find any instructions. What I found instead were user reviews. Okay, the first one says, good service, truck worked okay, the light for tow haul was on the entire time. Another one said, clear instruction on the how and why of tow haul indicator light. It pops on as a default and greatly increases gas consumption if one isn't hauling a trailer or car. Next, it was, the staff was friendly. I wish the tow haul feature would have been explained in the beginning. And finally, my favorite, I got into the truck and started it. The tow haul light was on. I called the office before I left to ask what the light was on for. The man in the office explained it to me without making me feel stupid. Okay? So when you're onboarding new people, it can be a new hire or it could be a new person on the team. I like to always think like the new person, the new guy on the team or the new person on the team. And even as I'm going about my work, if I see information that would be useful for a new person that would save them a lot of headache, I try to capture that. You should always consider this perspective of others. And a lot of times when you bring in a new person and start training them, why not update the docs together? Like, hey, here's your developer setup guide for your machine, all the Visual Studios and the build tools. Give them what you've got, and then when they say, you know what, this doesn't work. Okay, what did you find? Well, in step 13, you should have done this. Well, all right, great. Put that in there. That's what we want. And turn their frustration into some benefit going forward. And I always like to create some kind of record during the training process, even a recording Alistair Coburn says that sometimes the best form of onboarding is to take 2 senior engineers on a system, stand in front of a whiteboard and have one start drawing out the system in a diagram, and have the other one ask questions of that person at the board saying, well, why did you build it this way? And how does that work? And then in the course of an hour, you have a great resource from 2 experienced people that might not otherwise have the time to just sit with each new person and explain it to them over and over. And then that's reusable. I did this at a client a few years ago. We were, I guess, offboarding the system or knowledge transferring to 2 consultants after a team of 20 had worked on it for 3 years. And I thought, I'll be darned if these 2 people, get transferred out, and then we spent hours and hours. It was something like 30 hours doing knowledge transfer. So I brought in my camera. I've got it back there. It's the same one from way back, and I took hours and hours of video. And when within that next year, both those people were gone. What would that have been for if we hadn't recorded it? Bookmarks are a newbie's best friend. I have started as, I use bookmarks myself in my browser, but I always keep in mind, if someone were starting day one, would you rather forward them 50 emails that you have to look through your inbox or trickle to them, or could you just take a bookmark folder and say, hey, here you go, here's everything day one that you're going to need, and save them hours of asking, you digging through your email. Simple stuff like timesheets. And browsers are great at import and export. It gets a little tricky if you want to just maintain a separate list, but you can even use a different browser if that's all you're using for. This is a treasure map, and a lot of times we have these great documents, and maybe we've worked really hard on them, and they're like undiscovered treasure, but you know what? That's not worth very much. I used to ask my brother about his baseball cards. He's like, this one's worth $5. I said, would you ever sell it? He goes, no. I said, then it's not worth anything. It's priceless. So when you build a document, if nobody sees it, then it's really a waste of time and it costs you. So I think that you should include documents that you create and tools you create, scripts, whatever. Include those in your iteration reviews. So iteration or sprint reviews, a lot of times at the end of a sprint, you'll get, hey, let's look at what we built. I believe that demoing your docs is just as important. Speaking of discoverability, you should always put things where you can find them. I worked at a client where the coding standards were in SharePoint, and I couldn't find them. I said, well, where are they at? And he's like, oh, they're in there. And so I dug a little bit further. I said, well, where are they at? And it turns out that there were 2 folders top level. There's public and private. He's like, oh, I said, what are these for? Well, public is the entire organization, and private is just for IT. Oh, okay. I didn't want to go look in private because it's private, right? I mean, why would you do that? So put them where they can be found. Make sure you spell correctly. If you're in TFS or some kind of form tool and it puts little red squiggles under it, go look at why for a second. Because if you put in incorrect spelling, maybe flip letters or fat finger something, and someone's searching on it later and they put the correct spelling in, they're not going to find what you put in because the search engine doesn't know what you meant. Acronyms and jargon can be that way too. If we shorten things to terms that we use every day and new people aren't used to those, they're not going to think to look for those. Breadcrumbs are really good. If you put all your eggs in one basket, make sure you spread links out to that one place and refer back to them. And finally, pick good standalone titles. If you're in a system like TFS, every user story we had database schema to add for a feature. So we create a task and say, add database schema. Okay, great. But if you're looking at a list of all the tasks and it's like 10 instances of add database schema, you don't know until you click 3 levels in. Big and visible. Anybody hear that term in Agile? Information radiators they talk about. So when you decide things and you make these agreements with the team, you should always be thinking about the best way to get that word out. And don't just settle for an email or mentioning it, saying it just one time. I like posters. You have never lived until you're in an enterprise and you get to use the 11 by 17 paper. Okay, this is not legal size. This is like, oh my gosh, I could fold this in half and it's like 2 pages wide. So, find excuses to figure out that part of your printer. Knowledge worth saving. Well, sometimes you have existing documentation, but it's almost like digging for fossils to find out what's the value in it. And sometimes there's not much. This is from my honeymoon in Belize. We were taking a tour of Mayan ruins, and unfortunately the people weren't there to ask anymore because they're all dead and extinct. But the tour guide was saying, well, this rounded area, we believe this was a ball court, and unfortunately we don't know if that's for sure, and we don't know what the rules are. So I'm like, great. So that's Fernando. He was helping us out. And so when it comes to things like SharePoint, I like to say that's where information goes to die, or Shareberia, where it goes to starve and then die. So you can actually dig through SharePoint and rate it. Do a scavenger hunt. I challenged the team that I worked on a few years ago. I said, you know what, we should just make a challenge out of this. Gamify digging through SharePoint and salvaging whatever's in there. Another one is to mine hard drives. If people have stuff just on their hard drives, well, that's a problem because if that hard drive goes down or they're out sick, or if it's in their user folder and they terminate, then that's gone. And as cool as that script was to solve a problem, a production outage, sorry, it's gone. So make sure that all these little tools that you have, you centralize them, put them in source control. And that seems obvious, but it's really important. I have a hard time with knowledge that's spread through email. Email is a terrible knowledge tracker, okay? You get all these messy threads. You don't know if the person read it. Inbox clutter and then retention limits can mean that message will disappear after some time. I worked 4 years on a project and they instituted a retention limit of 2 years that eliminated messages that I needed from the beginning. In fact, the accounting department lost some software license keys because the retention limit just deleted the message. So what I like to do with email is I like to use categories specifically for this reason. So I use knowledge base and onboarding as categories. So whenever I get an email, I'm like, oh, that's got server information. That would be great for knowledge base. Or if there's some policy or something that somebody would need to know day one, I put that in onboarding. Outlook has something called Quick Steps that lets you make this a breeze. And it also has something called search folders that lets you file your emails however you want, but based on rules, including categories, it can surface it as if it's in one folder. And here's what that looks like. Excuse me. So I've got my inbox, and then I've got knowledge base and onboarding as folders. And that information can be stored anywhere in my mailbox, but I can always get to that spot to pick it out. Another thing that I think is important is emails that we send a lot or maybe even infrequently. If you do it a lot, you're like, no big deal. Well, the question there is, why do you keep doing this over and over and over? Or for infrequent stuff, you forget how you did it and the right way to do it. So you go back and you're like, dig. So I like to automate these. Email signatures is a good way to do that. It's not just for contact information. You can create multiple in Outlook. And for common requests, you can put in a body as part of the signature. Now, one of my favorites with Office is send to OneNote. This makes the leap between Outlook and your knowledge base. Sometimes you get this thread, even though it's kind of awkward, it's like all of the gold is in there, and you don't want to retype it. So it's really easy just to send that message as a new page in your OneNote notebook. Checklists are very useful. The Checklist Manifesto was put out in 2008 or 9. It's by a doctor called Atul Gawande. And he was exploring how we've got all these surgical procedures and they have such inconsistent results most of the time, not because of the surgery itself, but because of complications and mistakes made afterward. So he goes through a lot of information. He looks at the aviation industry, construction industry, and he was on a committee that came up with the safe surgery checklist, or surgical safety checklist, from the World Health Organization. And after much debate, they narrowed it down to 19 things that they think just about everybody in a surgery should check to make sure they're doing it right. And there are 3 pause points, these natural breaks in the process where it's a good time to check these things. So things like before you give anesthesia. Okay, well, do we know, is this the right patient? Have we marked, are we amputating the right limb? Are we not doing the wrong thing? And also before they cut the skin, that's another pause point. They say, has the person received antibiotics within the recommended period? And when the patient leaves, they go around, they say, okay, did we do the right thing? Are they in good shape? Have we collected all the instruments? Like, did we sew them up with a scalpel inside? We don't want to do that. So effective checklists, they kind of follow some rules. It's good to keep them to one page. And one thing that should be pointed out is that checklist that the World Health Organization did, they tell you should customize this. So it can be made to fit your needs. You should look for the pause points. Make sure it's easy to read, dark text on a light background. And checklists are not meant to be a tutorial. They're not meant to teach you how to do something. That's where a lot of people get hung up. They're not an instruction manual. And so what they're designed to do is help experts that know what they're doing keep from making mistakes. And there are two kinds of checklists. And I've used the wrong kind in the past, or as a team we did. Read, do checklist takes you through each step, says, okay, do this before you do the next one. And so it's like step, step, step. The other type is do, confirm. So you reach the pause point, you do all the stuff you usually do, and then you go, did we do this? Okay, good. Did we do that? Great. So you're just confirming that you did what you needed. Strategy, automate your knowledge. Sometimes we hear complaints that, Word docs, they get out of date. They don't really, they don't stay in tune with what the system actually does. And that's often true. But as we move toward automation, we can make the documentation part of the system. One technique that I use is what I call inspector views. I do a lot of database work at times, and we found, we had a bug or an outage or something, and there's some kind of data condition that we can look at to say, hey, I've got this query, it proves that this is a problem. So what I do is, rather than keep a script of it, I make it into a view. I put comments in there that says, hey, this is bug 3278, and it tells you what the issue was, and it tells you how to fix it. So in the future, if I'm gone, anybody else can run that view and see if records show up, and if they do, then they'll know how to fix it, or at least where to start. Templates. Anybody ever use a mail to link in a web page? It's like mail to joe@email.com, right? What you may not know is that there are additional parameters that you can add into there, the little question mark like you'd see on a normal HTML URL, that you can put in a subject and a body and all that fun stuff, and all of a sudden you're giving that person a quicker start. When they click that link, it's like, subject, I need help, or subject, call me for whatever, and then a nice little body where they can fill in a couple extra details. I like to embed them into documents. So an example is how you request a person to be on a new team or get mailbox access. Code generation, code snippets. I use auto hotkey for macros and things. And again, this applies to common and infrequent requests. You want to make templates out of the things that you don't do very often. I have what I call CRUD mutator workflow. ITIL systems, you gotta, you submit a ticket and you gotta get every little piece, every little field in the right order for it to go through the way you need it. Powerful questions. Anybody ever talk about questions and think about those the way that you use those? I like to say you should stop leaving others out. A lot of times on a team you'll get a few people that make all the key decisions, but then they don't do a very good job about letting everybody else know. There might be one email, or they said something in stand-up on Thursday morning on the day I had a doctor's appointment. But the question that I like to do is say, who have I missed? Who am I forgetting that we need to consider? And you've probably heard of the what is ready. Of course, there's what is done, but what is ready to be worked on for a user story. I worked with a team that had, for both what is ready and what is done, they had a nice little list of things posted on a poster, 11 by 17 for the win. And then, there's the is it done, like being honest about the full definition. what did we do last time? If we start seeing ourselves repeat things, then let's look at what it is we did last time so we can start eliminating the mistakes and then automating what we can. I like lunch and learns. Lunch and learn, you get together, someone demonstrates something. The value of a lunch and learn, you get to learn something new and demonstrate your learning. You're practicing your speaking skills, and maybe you get buy-in from your team on what you're learning. You're like, hey, maybe we could use this. And of course you get lunch. So, and sometimes, it pays to also look outward. You can, don't just write a document for your internal team. Think about others outside. Like, don't just write the world's most amazing document and then 3 people see it. Blog about it. Put it on a blog and build an audience. Or maybe you've got examples that aren't proprietary. You can put them in a GitHub gist, or you can answer Stack Overflow questions and help people out that are looking for answers. Now, I like, TDD and pair programming alone are very powerful, but if you put them together, and you put 2 people on the same problem and start building tests together, maybe switching off, that can lower your bus number, actually increase your bus number, you don't want a low one, pretty fast. So think about that. Pull requests and code reviews, that's a really great model. If you require pull requests to have a code review before you push it, or before you promote it, that works really well. So the question is, I've told you a lot of things, now what? Well, I think you should start small. Start now. Don't wait. Work on yourself first, up your capture game, eliminate the friction and how fast you can take screenshots and throw them in a cheap Word document or something. Make something great. Share it, build momentum. Get others excited about what you're building, and maybe they'll start following suit. So a lot of times it's mostly a question of attitude. King Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes wrote that, he said, I hated all my labor for which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool, yet he will rule over all my labor. This also is vanity. Sometimes you're like, what's the point? We're going to leave it for somebody, and they're not going to do anything with it, But it really is an attitude adjustment. So I say, stop making excuses. You should think differently about it. And I showed you this graphic earlier. This person looks like an outsider. So the question is, are they a loner or are they a leader, right? Think of it, flip it around so they're leading the charge and doing better. So the creator of the Boy Scouts, Robert Baden-Powell, said, try to leave this world a little better than you found it. And when your turn comes to die, you can die happy that at any rate you have not wasted your time, but you have done your best. So do your best, work at it. Tribal knowledge can be tamed, and that is everything. The slides are available at knowledgeplaybook.com, and my contact information is up there. If you want to know about the book, just see me after. Thank you.